Commander Jake Sullivan pressed his face against the cold metal of the observation window and stared down at the planet below. Kepler 442b looked peaceful from up here on the orbital station, Liberty's Edge. The blue oceans sparkled under the light of two yellow suns, and white clouds drifted across green continents like cotton balls on a summer day. It looked like the kind of place where families could build homes and children could run through grass fields without worrying about anything more dangerous than scraped knees. But Jake knew better. 3 days ago, this planet had been humanity's newest home. 2 million people had been living down there in cities they built with their own hands. They had farms and schools and little coffee shops where neighbors met to talk about the weather and their kids' soccer games. Now those same people were prisoners in their own homes because tall crystal aliens, called the Zephyrian Collective, had decided humans made good pets. Captain Lisa Morgan walked up beside him. Her reflection in the window showed tired eyes and a face that hadn't smiled in 3 days. She held a data pad in her hands, like it might bite her if she squeezed too hard. "The message from Earth Command just came through," Lisa said. Her voice sounded flat and empty, like someone had sucked all the life out of it. "They're calling it a diplomatic misunderstanding. The Council wants to negotiate shared custody of the planet." Jake felt something hot and angry twist in his stomach. Shared custody. Like the planet was a divorced couple's kid and not home to 2 million human beings who had never asked to be anyone's subjects. The Galactic Council had been playing politics for so long, they forgot that real people lived and died based on their decisions. "What about our people down there?" Jake asked, even though he probably didn't want to hear the answer. Lisa looked at her data pad and read from it like she was reading a grocery list. "The Zephyrians say they're treating everyone well. Clean housing, adequate food, educational programs about proper galactic citizenship." She looked up from the pad and Jake could see the anger burning behind her eyes. "They're treating our people like children who need to be taught how to behave in polite society." Jake turned away from the window and walked to the center of the observation deck. The Liberty's Edge wasn't a warship. It was a research station with laboratories and meeting rooms, and enough firepower to maybe scare off pirates if they were having a really bad day. 200 people worked on this station, and most of them were scientists and diplomats who had never fired a weapon at anything more dangerous than a target dummy. But Jake had been in the military long enough to know that sometimes the best weapon wasn't the biggest gun or the fastest ship. Sometimes the best weapon was being too stupid or too angry to know when you were beaten. The Zephyrians had built their whole empire on a simple idea: show up with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior technology, and wait for rational beings to surrender rather than fight a war they couldn't win. It had worked on 17 different species across 4 sectors of the galaxy. Nobody wanted to be the civilization that threw away millions of lives fighting against impossible odds. The crystal aliens were probably down on Kepler 442b right now, explaining to human children why their parents needed to learn better manners. They would use their translator devices to speak in calm, reasonable voices about the benefits of joining galactic civilization under proper supervision. They would point to their advanced technology and their peaceful methods and ask why anyone would choose violence over cooperation. Jake had read the reports about other worlds the Zephyrians had conquered. They really did treat their subjects well, by most standards. Good food, comfortable housing, access to advanced medical care and education. The only thing they took away was freedom, and they did such a good job of making captivity comfortable that most species eventually stopped caring about that small detail. But the Zephyrians had made one mistake that might turn out to be fatal. They had never conquered humans before. Lisa was still standing by the window, staring down at the planet like she could see through the clouds to the people below. "Jake, what are we going to do?" "Earth Command wants us to maintain position and wait for the diplomats to work something out. The Zephyrians have 3 heavy cruisers in orbit around the planet. We have mining lasers and construction equipment. Jake looked around the observation deck at the other crew members who had gathered to hear the news from Earth. Chief Engineer Ben Parker stood near the communications console, his hands covered in grease from working on the station's power systems. Dr. Amy Rodriguez sat in one of the chairs, still wearing her medical scrubs from treating a worker who had been injured in an accident that morning. Communications Officer Tony Wells was at his station, monitoring channels and pretending not to listen to their conversation. These weren't soldiers. They were regular people who had signed up to explore space and maybe help humanity make friends with alien civilizations. None of them had expected to end up in a war that Earth Command didn't want to fight. But Jake was starting to realize that maybe Earth Command was thinking about this situation all wrong. The Zephyrians expected humans to be rational. They expected surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. They expected negotiations and compromise and all the civilized behaviors that had made humanity respected members of the Galactic Council. What they didn't expect was for humans to stop being civilized. Jake made a decision that would either save 2 million people or get everyone on the Liberty's Edge killed. Maybe both. He walked over to the communications console and activated his personal command channel. "Tony, I need you to send a message to Admiral Kate Harrison at Fleet Command," Jake said. "Tell her I'm requesting permission to attempt a rescue operation with available resources." Lisa walked over quickly and grabbed his arm. "Jake, what are you thinking? We can't fight 3 Zephyrian cruisers with a research station." Jake looked at her and then at the rest of his crew. "Maybe we can't fight them, but maybe we don't need to fight them to beat them." The response from Earth Command came back faster than expected. Admiral Harrison's message was short and clear. "Permission denied. Maintain position and await diplomatic resolution." Jake stared at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it from the system without showing it to anyone else. Instead, he called a meeting of his senior staff in the main conference room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake said, when everyone had gathered around the table, "we have a problem. 2 million human beings are being held prisoner by aliens who think we're too civilized to do anything about it. Earth Command wants us to wait for diplomats to negotiate their freedom. The Zephyrians think we're too weak to challenge them." He paused and looked around the table at faces that showed confusion, fear, and growing anger. "I think it's time we showed the galaxy what happens when humans stop being civilized." Jake Sullivan sat alone in his quarters at 3 in the morning, staring at a photo of his sister's family back on Earth. His nephew Billy was 8 years old in the picture, gapped out and grinning while holding a baseball bat. His niece, Sarah, was only 5, wearing a pink dress and clutching a stuffed elephant. They lived in a small town in Ohio where the biggest worry was whether the local high school football team would make it to the state playoffs. They had never met aliens. They had never seen a spaceship except in movies. They thought their Uncle Jake was the coolest person in the universe because he worked on a space station and sent them pictures of distant planets. They had no idea that right now, 2 million people just like their neighbors were being told by crystal aliens that they needed to learn better manners. Jake set the photo down and opened his personal computer. He typed a message to Admiral Kate Harrison. "Request permission to attempt rescue operation with available resources." He stared at the words for 10 minutes before sending them. The reply came back within an hour. "Permission denied. Maintain position and await diplomatic resolution." Jake read the message 3 times. Then he deleted it from his system without saving a copy. Some orders were meant to be followed. Others were meant to be ignored by people who understood what was really at stake. At 0800 hours ship time, Jake called a meeting of his senior staff in conference room A. The Liberty's Edge had 3 conference rooms, but only one had a big enough table for everyone. Ben Parker showed up with coffee stains on his uniform and circles under his eyes from working all night on the station's power systems. Dr. Amy Rodriguez arrived carrying her medical bag because she never went anywhere without it. Lisa Morgan, brought 3 datapads and the kind of serious expression that meant she already knew this meeting wasn't going to be about routine station business. "Before we start," Jake said, "I want everyone to understand that what we discuss in this room stays in this room. What I'm about to propose goes against direct orders from Earth Command. Anyone who wants to leave now can do so without any questions asked." Nobody moved. Ben Parker took a sip of his coffee and said, "What did you have in mind, Commander?" Jake activated the holographic display in the center of the table. It showed the Kepler 442b system, with 3 red dots representing the Zephyrian cruisers in orbit around the planet. 1 blue dot showed the position of the Liberty's Edge. "The Zephyrians have conquered 17 worlds without firing a shot," Jake said. "They show up with overwhelming force, demonstrate their superior technology, and wait for rational beings to surrender. It's worked every time, because no one has been stupid enough to fight a war they couldn't win." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair. "Jake, are you suggesting we attack 3 heavy cruisers with a research station?" "I'm suggesting we do something the Zephyrians have never seen before," Jake replied. "I'm suggesting we act like humans who have nothing left to lose." He manipulated the holographic display to show detailed scans of the Zephyrian ships. "Look at these vessels. They're designed to intimidate, not fight. When was the last time the Zephyrians engaged in actual ship-to-ship combat?" Lisa consulted one of her data pads. "According to our records, never. They've built their entire military strategy around psychological warfare and technological superiority." "Exactly," Jake said. "They've never faced someone desperate enough to call their bluff. They've never dealt with humans who decided that dying free was better than living as pets." Ben Parker set down his coffee cup hard enough to make everyone jump. "Commander, I've got mining lasers that can crack asteroids and construction mechs that can move heavy equipment. But I don't have weapons that can penetrate military-grade shields." "Who says we need to penetrate their shields?" Jake asked. "The Zephyrians expect us to fight like a military force. They expect coordinated attacks and strategic planning and all the things they've prepared to defend against. What if we don't fight like soldiers?" He changed the display to show the mining ships Dakota and Colorado, which were currently working in the asteroid belt at the edge of the system. "Ben, how long would it take to retrofit mining charges into proximity mines?" Ben's eyes widened as he began to understand what Jake was thinking. "Maybe 6 hours if I had a full crew working on it. But Commander, those ships aren't designed for combat. They're civilian vessels with civilian crews." "So are we," Jake pointed out. "The question is whether we're going to act like civilians who accept their fate or civilians who fight back." Dr. Rodriguez spoke up from across the table. "What about the people on the planet? If we attack the Zephyrian fleet, won't they take it out on the colonists?" Jake had been wondering about that himself. It was the one part of the plan that kept him awake at night. The Zephyrians have built their reputation on being reasonable conquerors. They treat their subjects well, because that's part of their image. If they start executing civilians, other species will stop surrendering peacefully. "That's a big gamble," Lisa said quietly. "Everything about this is a big gamble," Jake admitted. "But what's the alternative? We sit here and watch, while 2 million people learn to be grateful for comfortable slavery." The room fell silent for several minutes. Jake could hear the hum of the station's life support systems and the distant sound of someone working in the engineering section. These were the sounds of normal life continuing while they planned something that might get everyone killed. Finally, Ben Parker spoke up. "What exactly did you have in mind, Commander?" Jake smiled for the first time in 3 days. "I want you to contact the Dakota and Colorado. Tell them we're conducting emergency rescue drills. I want those mining charges modified and ready for deployment within 12 hours. He turned to Dr. Rodriguez. "Amy, I need you to contact the Medical Transport Alaska. Tell them we might need emergency evacuation capabilities." "For the colonists?" she asked. For everyone, Jake replied. If this goes wrong, we're going to need every ship we can get to pull people out of harm's way. Lisa was already making notes on her datapad. What about Earth Command? They're going to notice when we start moving ships around and modifying mining equipment. Jake had thought about that too. We maintain communication silence with Earth until this is over. As far as they know, we're following orders and maintaining position. And as far as the Zephyrians know? Ben asked. As far as the No, we're a small research station with a crew that's slowly coming to terms with the reality of the situation. They'll expect us to make contact eventually to discuss surrender terms. Jake stood up and walked around the table, looking each of his officers in the eye. I want everyone to understand what we're risking here. If this works, we might save 2 million people and send a message to every would-be conqueror in the galaxy. If it fails, we'll probably all be dead by this time tomorrow. Dr. Rodriguez was the first to respond. Those people down there have families, Commander. Children who don't understand why strangers are telling their parents what to do. If there's even a chance we can help them, we have to try. Ben Parker nodded slowly. My brother lives in New Denver with his wife and 2 kids. They went to Kepler 44 to be, because they wanted to build something better for their family. I can't just sit here and let them become someone else's property. Lisa looked up from her datapads. What do you need me to do? Jake felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was there. I need you to help me plan the most audacious rescue operation in human history. And I need you to help me make sure the galaxy remembers what happens when you mess with human families. At exactly 6 in the morning, Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Liberty's Edge and gave the order that would either save 2 million lives or start the shortest war in galactic history. The orbital station broke from its stable position around Kepler 442b and began descending toward the planet's atmosphere like a meteor with a death wish. Open all communication frequencies, Jake told Tony Wells at the communication station. I want every ship, every station, and every listening post in this system to hear what I'm about to say. Tony's hands were shaking as he worked the controls, but his voice was steady. All frequencies open, Commander. Jake activated the ship-wide intercom and spoke in the same calm voice he had used to order coffee in the station's mess hall just an hour earlier. This is Commander Jake Sullivan of Earth Fleet. You have 24 hours to release all human civilians and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning. The response came faster than Jake had expected. High Commander Vextera as Crystalline face appeared on the main screen, his features flickering with what the translation software interpreted as amusement. The alien looked like someone had carved a person out of blue-green crystal and then taught it to wear military uniforms. Commander Sullivan, Vextera said, in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Your reputation precedes you as a reasonable being. Surely you understand the futility of your position. 1 orbital station against 3 battle cruisers. We had hoped humanity would demonstrate the wisdom that earned them respect in the Galactic Council. Jake leaned back in his captain's chair and smiled the kind of smile that had gotten him in trouble since he was 8 years old and decided to fight the 5th-grade bully who was picking on smaller kids. Hi, Commander, you've made 2 mistakes. First, you assumed we would choose the reasonable option. Second, you assumed we only have 1 orbital station. As if Jake's words had summoned them from empty space, energy signatures began appearing throughout the system. The mining ships Dakota and Colorado decloaked near the asteroid belt, their industrial hulls bristling with equipment that had never been designed for war but looked menacing enough when you were desperate. The deep space transport Nevada emerged from behind the gas giant's largest moon, its massive cargo bays now housing something other than trade goods. Even the little research vessel Vermont, which should have been 3 light-years away, studying stellar phenomena, materialized off the Zephyrian fleet's starboard side. Like a ghost ship returning from the dead, Jake watched Vexthera's crystalline features shift from amusement to confusion to something that might have been concern. The alien commander had probably never seen human ships coordinate like this. In most first contacts, humans showed up with diplomatic vessels and scientific equipment, all smiles and handshakes and offers to share technology. This was different. This was a human battle fleet that had appeared out of nowhere, armed with tools that weren't weapons but could probably kill you, just as dead if someone creative got hold of them. Commander Sullivan Vexthera said, his musical voice now carrying a note of uncertainty. What you are proposing is not rational. We have offered fair terms for integration into galactic civilization. Your people will be well cared for under our guidance. Hi, Commander, Jake replied. The problem with your offer is that you're asking people to be grateful for chains just because they're made of gold. While Jake kept Vexthera talking, Ben Parker was coordinating the most insane military operation ever attempted by people who weren't actually military. The Dakota had spent the morning seeding the space around the Zephyrian flagship with mining charges that looked like routine debris but packed enough explosive power to crack a heavy cruiser's hull like an egg. The Colorado was positioning itself to cut off the aliens' escape route to the system's edge. Its industrial lasers powered up and ready to carve through anything that tried to run. Dr. Rodriguez had convinced the Medical Transport Alaska to begin broadcasting on emergency medical frequencies, which galactic law required all military vessels to respect. The Zephyrians couldn't fire on a medical ship without violating treaties that kept the galaxy civilized. What they didn't know was that Amy had weaponized their own compassion, using the medical broadcasts to transmit targeting data to every human ship in the system. Lisa Morgan was running the civilian evacuation from the planet's surface, coordinating with colonists who had spent 3 days pretending to be cooperative prisoners while actually preparing for the biggest jailbreak in human history. Families who had been separated were using work details and educational programs to pass messages and supplies. Children who should have been in school were learning how to sabotage alien equipment, using nothing more than curiosity and small hands that could reach places adults couldn't. Commander, Vexthera said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You cannot possibly believe this display of primitive aggression will succeed against our superior technology. Hi, Commander, Jake replied. The thing about humans is that we're really good at taking your superior technology and using it in ways you never imagined. As if to prove his point, the research vessel Vermont suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. Its scientific sensors now focused on mapping every ship down to the molecular level. Information that had taken the aliens years to classify as military secrets was being broadcast to every human vessel in the system, giving them targeting data accurate enough to thread needles at interplanetary distances. But the real surprise was still coming. Jake had saved the best part of his plan for last. The part that would either vindicate his faith in human stubbornness or get everyone he cared about killed. Hi, Commander, Jake said, standing up from his captain's chair. You've spent so much time conquering civilized species that you forgot what uncivilized ones are capable of. The Liberty's edge suddenly accelerated toward the Zephyrian flagship, its hull beginning to glow with the heat of atmospheric entry. To every observer in the system, it looked like a desperate suicide run by a commander who had finally lost his mind under the pressure of fighting impossible odds. Vexthera's crystalline features showed what humans had learned to recognize as shock. Commander Sullivan, this is madness. Order your ship to change course immediately. Hi, Commander, Jake said calmly. You're absolutely right. This is madness. But you made one critical error in your calculations. What error? Vexthera demanded. Jake smiled as the distance between the two ships continued to shrink and alarms began screaming on both bridges. You assumed we were feeling sane today. The Zephyrian commander was shouting orders to his crew now, telling them to prepare for impact and activate emergency protocols. His ships were moving to intercept the Liberty's edge, their weapons charging. to destroy the incoming station before it could ram the flagship. But Jake had been counting on that response. The Zephyrians were rational beings who would try to minimize casualties even in combat. They would aim for the Liberty's Edge's engines to disable it rather than destroy it completely. They would hesitate just long enough to offer one final chance for surrender. That hesitation was going to cost them everything. All human vessels, Jake announced over the open channel, execute Operation Hometown on my mark. He watched the tactical display as his improvised fleet moved into position like pieces on a chessboard. The Dakota and Colorado were ready to spring their trap. The Nevada had deployed enough electronic warfare drones to blind an entire fleet. The Vermont had every enemy ship mapped and targeted on the planet below. 2 million human colonists were about to show the galaxy what happened when you tried to make pets out of people who had crossed interstellar space to build new lives with their own hands. "Mark," Jake said quietly. Then the longest day in human history began in earnest. The explosion that lit up the Kepler-442b system didn't come from the Liberty's Edge, ramming into the Zephyrian flagship. At the last possible second, Jake's station pulled away from its collision course, engines screaming at maximum burn, as it carved a sharp arc through space that would have been impossible for any ship not piloted by someone with absolutely nothing to lose. The explosion came from inside the Zephyrian vessel itself. High Commander Vexera had exactly 3 seconds to register what was happening before his flagship began tearing itself apart from within. The mining charges that Ben Parker had disguised as space debris had been quietly attaching themselves to the crystal ship's hull for the past 6 hours, guided by construction mechs so small and common that the aliens had dismissed them as routine maintenance equipment. "All Zephyrian vessels," Jake announced over the open channel as the flagship broke into 3 burning pieces. "This is what happens when you mistake human diplomacy for human weakness." The 2 remaining Zephyrian cruisers found themselves surrounded by ships that had appeared to be civilian vessels just hours earlier. The Dakota and Colorado had moved into position with the slow patience of miners who spent months planning a single perfect blast. Their industrial lasers, designed to carve through solid rock, now carved through military shields that had never been tested, against tools repurposed by desperate humans. Captain Roy Hayes of the mining ship Dakota opened his own communication channel to the Zephyrian fleet. His voice carried the flat tone of someone who spent his working life in the vacuum of space, dealing with problems that could kill you if you made the smallest mistake. "Zephyrian vessels," Hayes said, "you are surrounded and outgunned by people who move asteroids for a living. We strongly suggest you reconsider your position." The deep space transport Nevada proved that cargo capacity could be a weapon when used creatively. Captain Ellen Price had spent the morning deploying electronic warfare drones throughout the system, using her ship's massive storage bays to field more surveillance and jamming equipment than most military fleets carried. Every Zephyrian communication was being intercepted, every sensor reading was being corrupted, and every tactical system was being fed false information by humans who had turned civilian electronics into weapons of war. But the real shock for the Zephyrian commanders came from the research vessel Vermont. Captain Steve Johnson had been using his ship's advanced sensors to study stellar phenomena when Jake's call for help reached him 3 light-years away. He had dropped everything and made the fastest hyperspace jump of his career to reach Kepler-442b in time for the fight. Now his scientific equipment was providing targeting data, so precise that the human fleet could hit individual components on enemy ships. Information that should have taken months of intelligence gathering was being broadcast in real time to every human vessel in the system. "This is Captain Johnson aboard the Vermont," Steve announced to the remaining Zephyrian ships. "We've mapped your vessels down to the quantum level. We know the location of every power coupling, every life support system, and every structural weak point. We strongly recommend immediate withdrawal from this system." The surviving Zephyrian commander, Subcommander Calandra, aboard the cruiser Eternal Harmony, tried to restore order to her fleet. Her crystalline features showed the kind of panic that came from realizing that everything you thought you knew about your enemy was wrong. "Human vessels," she transmitted. "This aggression violates 17 galactic treaties. The Council will do nothing," Jake interrupted. "Because the Council is run by civilized beings who think diplomacy can solve every problem. But you made the mistake of taking hostages from a species that stops being civilized when you threaten their families." While the space battle unfolded above, the real surprise was happening on the planet's surface. What the Zephyrians had assumed was a desperate civilian evacuation was actually the deployment of 2,000 human colonists who had spent 3 days pretending to be cooperative prisoners, while actually preparing for the biggest act of defiance in galactic history. The humans didn't attack the Zephyrian occupation forces directly. That would have been suicide against aliens with superior technology and training. Instead, they did what humans had always done when faced with occupying forces. They made life impossible for the occupiers. Every piece of Zephyrian equipment on the planet began malfunctioning. Power generators developed mysterious faults that required constant maintenance. Communication arrays started receiving nothing but old Earth music broadcasts. Transportation vehicles found their fuel contaminated with substances that made engines seize up after a few hours of operation. The Zephyrians had expected resistance from soldiers. They had prepared for coordinated military action and guerrilla warfare. What they got instead was 2 million people who approached the problem of alien occupation with the same stubborn creativity they had used to build homes on an alien world. Farmers used irrigation equipment to flood Zephyrian supply depots. Engineers reprogrammed construction mechs to disassemble alien installations while the occupiers slept. Teachers organized children into groups that could slip through ventilation systems and sabotage equipment from the inside. Even the elderly got involved. Grandparents, who had lived through Earth's last World War, shared knowledge about making life difficult for unwanted visitors. They showed younger colonists how to make simple tools into instruments of resistance, and how to turn everyday activities into acts of defiance. The Zephyrian ground commander, Field Marshal Zex Mara, found himself dealing with problems he had never encountered in 17 previous conquests. His troops were trained to fight soldiers, not to deal with children who rewired their equipment to play cartoon sound effects, or senior citizens who organized bake sales that somehow resulted in all the alien vehicles running out of fuel. Subcommander Calandra, Zex Mara, transmitted to the fleet, "The surface situation is becoming untenable. The humans are not resisting occupation in any conventional sense. They are simply making it impossible for us to maintain control without committing resources we cannot spare." In space, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The Zephyrian cruiser Eternal Harmony was dead in space, its engines disabled by precise strikes from mining lasers that had been designed to cut through rock, but worked just as well on military-grade hull plating. The third cruiser, Divine Purpose, was attempting to retreat to the edge of the system, but the Colorado had cut off its escape route and was herding it back toward the planet like a sheepdog working with particularly stubborn livestock. Subcommander Calandra made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Commander Sullivan," she transmitted, "this cannot be how civilized species resolve their differences. Surely we can negotiate a peaceful solution that benefits both our peoples." Jake's response was broadcast on every frequency in the system, ensuring that every ship, every station, and every colonial outpost heard humanity's new position on galactic diplomacy. "Subcommander," Jake said, "you're absolutely right. This isn't how civilized species fight wars. But you made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed we were feeling civilized today." The remaining Zephyrian ships began broadcasting surrender signals within the hour. By the end of the day, every alien vessel had withdrawn from the Kepler 44-B system, leaving behind only a message from High Commander Vexthera, transmitted from his escape pod, as it drifted toward the edge of space. "Commander Sullivan," the alien leader said, his musical voice now carrying notes of something that might have been respect. "You have taught the collective a valuable lesson about human nature. We will not forget it." Jake sat in his command chair and watched the Zephyrian fleet disappear into hyperspace. Around him, his crew was cheering and crying and hugging each other with the kind of relief that came from surviving something that should have killed everyone involved. "Commander," Lisa Morgan said, "what do we tell Earth's command?" Jake looked at the tactical display showing human ships spread throughout the system and 2 million free people on the planet below. "We tell them that sometimes the best way to keep the peace is to remind everyone what happens when you break it." 3 months after the Kepler 442b incident, Jake Sullivan sat in his office aboard the Liberty's Edge, staring at 2 pieces of paper on his desk. One was a commendation for valor from Earth Fleet Command, signed by Admiral Kate Harrison herself. The other was a formal reprimand for disobeying direct orders, also signed by Admiral Harrison. Both documents carried the same date and the same official seal. Jake had framed them both and hung them on the wall next to a photograph of New Denver taken the day after the Zephyrians withdrew. The picture showed 2 million human civilians going about their daily lives under an open sky, free to choose their own destiny among the stars. Children played in parks their parents had built with their own hands. Farmers tended crops and soil they had made fertile through years of hard work. Shopkeepers served customers who paid with currency they had earned through honest labor. It looked like freedom, and Jake had decided that was worth more than following orders that would have left those people as comfortable prisoners. The galaxy had spent the past 3 months trying to understand what had happened in the Kepler 442b system. Military analysts from 17 different species had requested copies of the battle recordings. Diplomatic schools were teaching case studies about the incident. Even the Galactic Council had devoted 3 emergency sessions to discussing the implications of humanity's new approach to interstellar relations. The official report filed with Galactic Command had been given a simple title: "One Human, One Planet, One Death." A Galaxy wasn't laughing by sundown. It had become required reading at every military academy in known space, not as an example of brilliant tactics or superior technology, but as a case study in what happened when humans decided they had nothing left to lose. Lisa Morgan knocked on Jake's office door and entered without waiting for permission. She carried a datapad and wore the expression of someone who had been monitoring galactic news feeds all morning. The Zephyrian Collective just announced they're withdrawing their claims from 3 more worlds, Lisa said, setting the datapad on Jake's desk. The Kelton Republic has declared independence. The Vorthen Mining Guild is demanding reparations for years of forced labor. 17 previously pacified species have petitioned the Galactic Council for immediate recognition as sovereign systems. Jake picked up the datapad and scrolled through the reports. Each story followed the same pattern. Species that had been conquered by the Zephyrians were suddenly remembering that they had never actually agreed to be conquered. Worlds that had accepted occupation as the price of avoiding war were discovering that maybe war wasn't the worst thing that could happen to them. It's like the whole galaxy suddenly remembered that surrender isn't the only option when someone with bigger guns shows up. Lisa continued. The Council is calling it the most significant shift in interstellar politics since the Treaty of Unified Worlds. Jake set down the datapad and looked out his office window at Kepler 442b rotating slowly below. The planet looked the same as it had 3 months ago, but everything else had changed. Humanity's reputation as the galaxy's diplomatic peacekeepers had been replaced by something else entirely. Now other species looked at humans and wondered what they were capable of when push came to shove. The answer, as it turned out, was quite a lot. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been invited to lecture at the Galactic Medical Institute about her innovations in combat medicine using civilian equipment. Ben Parker had received offers from 6 different military contractors who wanted to study his techniques for converting industrial tools into weapons of war. Even Tony Wells had become famous as the communications officer who had coordinated the most audacious military deception in galactic history. But the real heroes were the 2 million colonists who had shown the galaxy that humans didn't need superior technology or overwhelming force to win their freedom. They just needed to be stubborn enough to keep fighting when any reasonable species would have given up. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication from Earth. Jake activated his personal screen and found himself looking at Admiral Kate Harrison's face. She looked older than she had 3 months ago, with new lines around her eyes and gray streaks in her hair that hadn't been there before. "Commander Sullivan," she said, without preamble, "I've just finished reading the final analysis of the Kepler-442b operation. The Council wants to meet with you next month to discuss humanity's role in galactic security." "What kind of role?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The kind that involves making sure other species think twice before they decide to test human resolve," Harrison replied. "The Zephyrian Collective has announced that they're transitioning from conquest to diplomacy as their primary method of expansion. 6 other aggressive species have made similar announcements in the past month." Jake leaned back in his chair and considered what the Admiral was telling him. "They're afraid of us now." "They're cautious of us now," Harrison corrected. "There's a difference. Fear leads to arms races and preemptive strikes. Caution leads to negotiation and compromise. The galaxy has learned that humanity prefers diplomacy, but they've also learned what happens when diplomacy fails." The Admiral paused and looked at something off-screen. "Jake, what you did was reckless and dangerous, and completely against regulations. It was also necessary and effective, and probably saved millions of lives. The question is whether you're willing to do it again, if the situation calls for it." Jake looked at the photographs on his wall, at the commendation and reprimand that represented the 2 sides of his decision to disobey orders. He thought about his nephew Billy and niece, Sarah, back on Earth, growing up in a universe where bullies now thought twice before picking on smaller species. "Admiral," Jake said, "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure human families can live free among the stars." Harrison nodded as if she had expected that answer. "In that case, Commander, I have a new assignment for you. The Rigel system has been having some problems with pirates who think human cargo ships are easy targets. I thought you might be interested in showing them how wrong they are." Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. "When do we leave?" "As soon as you can get your crew together," Harrison replied. "And Jake, this time you have official authorization to use whatever methods you think are necessary." After the Admiral signed off, Jake sat alone in his office for several minutes, thinking about how much the galaxy had changed in just 3 months. Humanity had spent decades building a reputation as peaceful mediators and diplomatic problem solvers. That reputation had earned them respect and trust from dozens of alien species, but it had also made them look weak to species that equated peace with cowardice and diplomacy with surrender. The Kepler-442b incident had changed that perception forever. Now when aggressive species looked at humans, they saw something that preferred peace but was perfectly capable of war. They saw beings who would negotiate in good faith, but would fight to the death if negotiations failed. They saw a species that had crossed interstellar space not because they were running from something, but because they were bold enough to build new homes among alien stars. Jake stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the planet, where 2 million people were living proof that some things were worth fighting for. Tomorrow he would take the Liberty's Edge to the Rigel system to deal with pirates who thought human lives were acceptable losses in their business plans. He was looking forward to showing them how wrong they were. The galaxy had learned an important lesson at Kepler-442b. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, or their numbers, or their strategic brilliance. It was their absolute refusal to accept that some fights couldn't be won. As Jake prepared to face whatever challenges awaited in the Rigel system, He knew that lesson would serve humanity well in the years to come. The galaxy was a big place, full of species that respected strength and preyed on weakness. It was fortunate that humans had finally decided to stop hiding their strength behind diplomatic smiles and peaceful intentions. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place.